From the Oregon State University's Extension Service, you are listening to In the Woods with the Forestry and Natural Resources Program. This podcast aims to share the voices of researchers, land managers, and members of the public interested in telling the story of how woodlands provide more than just trees. They provide interconnectedness that is essential to your daily life. Stick around to discover a new topic related to forests on each episode. Welcome back to another episode of In the Woods. I'm your host, Lauren Grand, Assistant Professor of Practice and Extension Agent in Oregon State University's College of Forestry. For most small woodland owners, having a timber harvest usually happens only once or twice in a lifetime, and these projects can be extremely daunting and risky for those that don't have a lot of experience. So to help clarify some of these details, I've invited Francisca Belart, our assistant professor and OSU Extension timber harvesting specialist, to the podcast today. Welcome, Fran.
Hi, Lauren.
I'm so glad that you can join me on the podcast today, Fran. I'm hoping our discussion on small-scale harvesting can answer some questions for people who are unfamiliar with the harvesting process, and then also just make it more approachable and less risky for small landowners. But before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Just so it's not a really extremely long story, I will start by going to my PhD project that was related to energy production from harvest residues. I had plots all over Oregon, and some of those plots were in really large industrial landowner property, and other ones were in smaller landowners. And in those cases, I was able to talk with small woodland owners and learn about their objectives and their goals for their property. And I was very grateful that they let me do my study there. And I really enjoyed the fact that I was able to gather some data and produce some results or conclusions that would be helpful for the landowner to make decisions. So I was thinking, well, this is cool. I can do something that can actually be useful information for somebody that I can actually see and talk to. So that's strangely how I learned the most about extension. Even being at OSU, I learned about extension just by doing research. And so I thought, well, I would really like to find a career in extension. So that's how I learned about extension and job possibilities. And my specialty was in timber harvesting and operations. And there was this position open about harvesting specialist. So I applied for it, and I am very happy that I am able to do this job and learn from landowners through the years.
Well, we're really happy that you were able to get this job too, because you're a great colleague to work with, and I've learned so much more about harvesting from you. And I've had so much fun putting together workshops as well. And now I get to share that knowledge with you and our listeners on timber harvesting. So let's start out with a bird's eye view of, timber harvesting. Why might someone want to harvest in the first place? How do landowners come to this decision?
So there are many reasons why a landowner might want to harvest. It could be for revenue, but of course, that's not the only reason. There could be a restoration project. They might have forest land that has changed use over time, and they want to restore to what would be there naturally, and that would lead to having, a timber harvest. Could be for clearing up trees that have been damaged by storm or fire, or it can also be a thinning, just part of a long-term project of, getting larger timber in the long term. So there are many, many reasons. But in normal circumstances, we encourage landowners to make a decision as part of a greater plan for their property, depending on what their ultimate goals are for the property as a whole, and is specific for each unit. we encourage landowners to have a management plan because that really helps guide the landowner towards those goals. So the harvest comes at a time in which it should happen so the landowner can fulfill those goals over time. I guess what I'm trying to say is shouldn't be a spur of the moment decision unless there's a really big, important reason for that.
Right. So nobody should be waking up and saying, I think I'll harvest trees today.
Correct. Because, and practically, there's a lot of stuff that goes into planning for that harvest too. So it's not that something that you can just wake up and do.
Right. Okay. So that planning, that's a good segue. So what are some things what are some of the first steps that a landowner should think about when they're planning a harvest?
So let's say the landowner already had their plan and they decided, okay, there's a unit that, we're planning on harvesting. So one of the first steps that we always recommend is to notify the Oregon Department of Forestry through an online system called Ferns, or alternatively, if the landowner does not want to use this online service, they can visit their local office. Legally, the requirement is 15 business days before any operation starts. However, if there's something that needs to be considered before the harvest, this notification of operations can help the landowner figure that out beforehand. Let's say there's a live fish stream that needs to be, specifically handled. So then the landowner will know far in advance if that needs to be done. Then I would say these days finding a logger would be a step that should be done very far in advance. Unless the landowner already has a working relationship with a logger, they will need time to find one. And the good ones are usually very busy. So we recommend to book them in advance. We did a survey in 2018 in which the average lead time for them was between 1 and 6 months for them to, be booked for a job. But I have also heard that loggers are booked a year in advance or more, even especially if it's a specialty logger that specializes in certain operations, they might really be booked for a really long time. So to me,
it sounds like if you have a logger that you really like, you should try to build that working relationship with them. Do you think that would help move you up in their list?
Well, I think if it's a small job, it might not be super attractive to them just because they need a lot of time and resources to move to different jobs. So if it's a really small job, it might be hard to kind of move up the list. But if you have a working relationship with somebody that you've been working through the years and several harvests, that will definitely help them have you, consider your property and the operation a little more than others, I guess. So, and I guess the third one would be to make sure there's proper access to the harvest units. You as a landowner know your land more than anybody. So making sure that the roads are appropriate and that there's room for landings. If you need an easement, let's say you need to take the wood through a road that is not your property, that you have everything lined up for that as well, is a very important step to take, especially when you're talking about roads that are up to standard for a log truck and heavy equipment. If your roads is good for your pickup truck, it's probably not enough for a large truck. So to have proper access, to me, that means that you are thinking about large equipment going through that road.
Right. Yeah. Those log trucks can be pretty heavy, and I bet they can do a lot of damage and need a lot more space.
Absolutely.
And so, and when you say an easement, and that means if you don't own the road, you need permission from a landowner, right? Do you recommend a written contract for that?
Yeah, so we recommend having a written contract that states some liability, and then also how long are you going to be hauling timber through that road. It is also good to document how the road looks like before the operation starts, and have some sort of an agreement with the owner of that road to say, okay, this is the standard that the road is in right now. It will probably be changing as the trucks go by, but then this is how to the standard that we are going to restore this road. And also important is to determine how the owner of that road, of that property, is going to be compensated. And that could be a certain amount per 1,000 board feet that is going through that road, because the more volume it goes through it, the more affected the road will be. Or is it a certain standard that the road needs to be back to, or something like that, that needs to be stated on that contract.
Okay, that makes sense. That's important to make sure that both people are happy at the end and that relationship maintains so you can continue operations in the future.
Correct.
Okay, so, some of this, as we mentioned earlier, could be daunting or overwhelming. There are professional foresters out there that can help small landowners through this process. Can you talk a little bit about what consulting foresters do and how that relationship works?
Yeah, so consulting foresters are professionals that can help the landowner with all the tasks that were previously mentioned, and many others. That includes drafting a management plan, right? How to manage the forest for different goals, conduct forest inventories, market the timber, finding a logger, and many other tasks. They can help you plan for the harvest in terms of, okay, is this road good enough, for a timber harvest? They have the experience and to kind of be able to assess whether the road is going to be good enough for truck traffic, for example, or equipment. They are familiar with the local loggers. They know them, and they might have a little more influence, in getting a spot, for your harvest, if they have experience, and you as a landowner don't know who to talk to in terms of finding, a logger. They can help you market the timber as well. They, of course, know the log buyers and are able to obtain purchase orders for you and all those things. However, I always remind people to keep in mind that you will need to have a certain amount of volume to be able to cover the costs of obtaining that help. So say if you have less than a truckload of timber, is probably not going to be cost effective to get that kind of help.
But if you have like a larger operation, there's some research out there that says having a consulting forester might actually increase your total revenue because of their experience.
Right. So if this is something that you will continue to do in the future, and you have the forester helping you planning for your property as a whole, and you envision that you will be having more harvests in the future, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you got to bet, right? Like any decision, you got to weigh your pros and cons and what makes the most sense for your situation.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked a little bit about loggers and getting a logger and it being one of the first things that maybe you consider, just because there's sometimes such a large wait time. How do you find that logger and know it's the right person for the job?
So finding a logger, for the most part, the best way of doing that is to, if you don't know anybody, is to reach out to somebody who has done a timber harvest in the past and they know a logger that they are happy with, and find a recommendation directly from somebody who's worked with the logger. that is actually doing that same survey that we did in 2018. I believe 60% of the loggers, that's how they find their jobs, is through recommendation from another landowner. So when the landowner is happy with the logger and working with them, then, they have a long-term, partnership. So they, keep working with the same logger over time. So if you don't know specifically somebody who has done a recent operation, my recommendation would be to reach out to OSWA, in which there are many landowners who probably have had some sort of an experience with a logger, and you can talk to them and find out somebody that they can recommend. And the next thing is that if the landowner has never done a timber harvest, I will also recommend, if possible, to visit a recent harvest and kind of actually see how it looks like afterwards. To me, that would be the ideal option. Not only talk with the logger, but being able to kind of see how the harvest looks like afterwards. Then, if none of those are options, we do have an online Oregon Forest Industry Directory in which you can search for contractors. There's also your local ODF forester might be able to give you a list of loggers that they have been working with or that they can recommend. And finally, the Associated Oregon Loggers website has a list of loggers by area within Oregon that you can contact.
Okay, so it's like almost like interviewing anybody where you'd want to get references, and part of that reference is going to a recent job that they've done to make sure it looks like the style that you'd want on your property.
Right, exactly. And, the logger, if you have the opportunity of interviewing 1, 2, or 3 of them, the best logger is not always the cheapest one, is most of the time the one that aligns with your objectives as a landowner the best.
Yeah, I hear that a lot with most contractors, is to make sure that there's good communication and that you have, something in common in terms of what your objectives are.
Right.
And for a logger, some of that will also be what type of equipment they have. So you gave a lot of good examples of finding the right logger for you in terms of matching goals and who to talk to. Is there any, how do you know that they have the right equipment for the job? Or is there any specific equipment you should be looking for?
So in terms of equipment, usually I would say for the most part, loggers will specialize in certain type of operations. I would say the very first difference will be slope. So a logger will usually have equipment that, is suited for working in steep terrain. And for that reason, they probably would have, a cable logging operation. So depending, let's say, between having steep slopes in your property or flat terrain, that will determine the kind of equipment that they will have. The next one would be whether they specialize on clear cuts or they work on thinnings for the most part. That will also determine what kind of equipment they have. If they are specialized in thinning, they will have a different type of equipment than if they were to work on clear cuts.
So being clear on what your, just what you said earlier, being clear on what your objectives are and asking them, how they will work with you will help sort of get those questions answered then.
Right. And you can always ask them, what kind of jobs have you done previously? If they have examples of, I've done thinnings here and here and there, that would probably mean that they have the equipment specific for thinning.
Okay, great. And then, of course, the question of a contract. So when you work with any contractor, do we recommend using a contract?
Yeah, all the time. A contract is very important. And for the most part, I would say 95% of the loggers, at least on the survey that we found, do actually work with a contract, because that's the way that, you get everything in paper. You can also, do it by word, but there's also always potential for problems in that, because there are so many different things that can change or happen, and you want to be sure that you have a contract that back up all those different scenarios. And it also includes how the contractor is going to be paid, what kind of work is the contractor supposed to do. Many landowners assume that, for example, the logger is responsible for cleaning up after they're finished. And that's not always the case. I would say for the most part, it's not the case. And it doesn't mean that they don't do that kind of work. They do. It's just that it will probably cost more to include it. So if you have, an itemized cost on your contract, you kind of know what to expect, how much it's going to cost. And it's not going to be a surprise afterwards if something is included or is not.
Right, that's a good point. Yeah. So it sounds like the contract protects you and it protects the loggers. So everybody knows what the agreement is and how the payments are going to work. And so it makes sense to have. And you touched a little bit on cleanup there. So I'll just follow up with, speaking of cleanup, you said that it's not always the case that loggers clean up. It's something that needs to be specified in the contract. So that's probably also true with things like burn piles and planting and things like that, right?
Yeah.
What about trucking? I always hear that loggers usually take care of the trucking and trucking costs. Is all that included as well?
For the most part, they will subcontract the trucking. But when you have this contract, you want to make sure there is kind of a specification whether the trucking is included in the bid or not. Yeah, some loggers own their own trucks, but that is good for you to have an idea of what all of those items, the falling, the logging, the loading into the trucks, the trucking, and then the cleanup, if you want to have that done, are kind of the main items that should be in the contract. And you should know how much each of those cost and whether they are included in the total cost.
Okay. So we talked about cutting down the trees and potentially taking them to a mill. But which mill should you take them to? So I guess maybe one of the steps at the same time as finding your logger is also finding who's going to actually purchase the trees. So who are the people that purchase the trees, and how do you reach out to them, and what should you know about contacting log buyers?
Yeah, so log buyers are the ones that pretty much represent the mills on the ground. They are looking for logs and raw materials for their sawmills. So for the most part, the mill that can best utilize your particular trees is going to be the mill that pays the most for them. So the log buyer has the ability to understand and be able to kind of see, their products and the logs that they care the most about in your property. So if you can contact at least 3 log buyers, if that's a possibility, have them come to your property, see your trees, and generate and talk to you about how much those are worth for the mill, and then they can give you a purchase order. The purchase order contains the breakdown of different log grades with diameters and lengths and how much the mill is paying for each one of them. So as I said before, the mill which production line matches the best the trees that you have will be the mill that probably will pay the most for your logs. And let's say you contact 3 and then you have 3 purchase orders with different prices for what they pay. But you also need to keep in mind that the distance to the mill is very important. And let's say if you have one of those purchase orders, the mill is paying a lot for your logs, but then it is really far, the trucking is going to eat your profits, and in the end, it's not going to be worth it. So for the most part, I would say that the best mill is going to be the closest one to you, as long as they take those different, log sizes and grades.
Yeah, that's a good pro tip.
Yeah. So always consider trucking.
Yeah, that's probably something that we don't think about very often.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like we've gotten to know all the players that are involved in the process. And earlier we talked about the Oregon Department of Forestry and notifying them when you're planning to do a harvest. And so that probably also relates to the harvesting laws that we follow here in Oregon. Can you talk a little bit about what the main laws are that people should know about when they're considering a timber harvest?
So the law for forestry is the Forest Practices Act that is being monitored by Oregon Department of Forestry. And this Forest Practices Act is being currently updated. There are new rules pertaining the width of riparian areas that need to be left without harvest. There are some new rules pertaining roads and the standard especially the roads that need to be built. They need to be built to different standards. There's also some specifications about a steep slope logging, and I believe that those will start being implemented in the following years. So it's not something that we are going to worry about right now, but I don't quite remember exactly when they are going to start coming into effect, but things will definitely change with regards to roads and logging in the coming years. The best person who can help you regarding these rules are your local ODF foresters. Your local ODF forester always, they really are helpful with small woodland owners. They like to take the approach of try and help you fix something before something bad happens. So they have a proactive approach to help you not get in trouble.
Well, that's reassuring. They're looking for education first. But there are some rules that won't change, right? So things like harvest size maximums and reforesting after clear-cut harvests and protection of waterways and things like that, right?
Yeah, those. So on the new rules, there's going to be an expansion of certain rules, but the ones that are old will remain.
Great. Okay, well, so those are probably the main things to at least start thinking about when you're considering a small-scale harvest or a timber harvest in general. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we missed or that you think it's important that people think about?
I would say something that is kind of always forgotten and people don't love to talk about I would say as far as roads, it's not the most popular topic on the classes, and I understand it. It is because for a landowner, roads means cost, and it means money, and it means a lot of money. So I guess my biggest recommendation, I guess, for landowners is to try and keep the roads to standards in a way that the water is kept off the road, to keep the ditches clean and your roads functioning. Because in the end, although those things require time and some investment, you will be avoiding some sort of a catastrophic failure on a road, which can cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So I would say kind of one of my final recommendations is just to keep an eye on your roads and make sure that you are not heading to a catastrophic, failure on your roads, especially if you're thinking about a timber harvest.
Okay, right. It's the age-old saying that prevention is cheaper and better than recovery.
Right. And especially now that we will be having a new laws that will, we want to make sure that there is, we are taking a proactive, approach to the two roads.
Okay, great. So now that we have a way to encourage that from the beginning. Okay, let's finish up our podcast with something that we can do or call to action. So let's say that someone listening is thinking about considering a harvest. What homework would you give them? What's the first thing that they should start by doing?
So the first one would be to send that notification of operations to ODF, just because it can, help you figure out that whether there's something in the area on the unit that you need to really be careful about. The second one would be to find a logger and get them in, have them get you in their books. If you already know one, you can just give them a call. If you don't, then you probably need a lot more time. You will need a lot of lead time. They are especially busy during the summertime. And that is just mainly because there's access to a lot more timberland during the summertime because you don't require rock in your roads. So especially if you're thinking about planning a harvest in the summer, just get the logger identified and in their agenda. Then the third one would be to find out which Forest Practices Act rules apply to you and figure out what needs to be done on the ground about them. If you're unsure, have an ODF forester visit your property and have a chat with you if you have any questions about what rules apply and which ones don't. And lastly, have a good understanding of the access to the harvest unit, whether you need road improvements, do you need to build up a spur road, do you need an easement? And when thinking about this, always think of a log truck or large equipment and not your pickup truck.
Those are good tips. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining me today, Fran. It's so good to know that even though harvesting is a daunting project, there's lots of resources and people like you out there that landowners can talk to help them be successful in meeting their objectives and still leave the land in a good place to continue providing those ecosystem benefits that we rely on and are needed for those plants and animals that we love. So as you're listening today, if any other questions came up about small scale harvesting, timber harvesting, or forestry in general that we didn't cover, check out our website at inthewoodspodcast.org and hit the Tell Us What You Think tab. Leave us a comment or a voicemail, and we'll be sure to have a future episode that will address your questions. But don't leave us yet. We have our lightning round up next. Okay, Fran, as usual, we have a few more questions that we want to ask all of our guests. So the first one is, what is your favorite tree?
My favorite tree is incense cedar. I just love the smell.
Oh, it's a good smell.
Yeah.
They're beautiful. Okay, what is the most interesting thing you bring with you in the field?
It's not something I carry always, but if there's poison oak, I am willing to wear a Tyvek suit or this painter suit. So there's absolutely no chance that poison oak can ever reach my skin. I am extremely allergic.
Yeah, poison oak is not a fun thing to be allergic to.
Yeah.
It's good that you have such a good resource to help prevent that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then lastly, what resources would you recommend to our listeners if they're interested in diving deeper into learning more about harvesting?
So I would highly recommend 2 extension publications. One of them is Harvesting and Selling Timber, a field guide for woodland owners. This is EM9197. You can access to the extension publications website. And then the other one is the Small Scale Harvesting for Woodland Owners, EM9129. It's a shorter publication and is available for free in our extension website.
Great. Thanks, Fran. We'll be sure to get those links on our website and in the show notes as well. And thank you again for joining me today. This concludes our episode. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you join us again in a couple weeks to explore another topic on Oregon's amazing forests. But until then, what's in your woods?
Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on our website, inthewoodspodcast.com. We would love to hear from you. Visit the Tell Us What You Think tab on our website to leave us a comment, suggest a guest or topic, or ask a question that can be featured in a future episode. And also, give us your feedback by filling out our survey. In the Woods was created by Lauren Grand, Jacob Putney, Carrie Berger, Jason O'Brien, and Stephen Fitzgerald, who are all members of the Oregon State University Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Team. Episodes are edited and produced by Kellen Soriano. Music for In the Woods was composed by Jeffrey Hino, and graphic design was created by Christina Freehoff. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we can't wait to talk to you again next month. Until then, what's in your woods?